Hello and welcome to a live stream that myself and Donal here are doing about the progress of our book. Donal, welcome to the channel.
Thanks, Tom.
Good have you been on? Have you been on? We haven't done a live stream, have we?
No, I don't think so.
No, we've never done.
We've done a lot of episodes. So.
Yeah, a lot of shit talking, not so much live streams. Right, so I suppose we just give a bit of a general chat on how we're progressing with the book. How long has it done since we actually said we were going to do the book? Will we have a look?
Yeah, have a look. Yeah,
it's not too. Is it a year and a half? Is it April 2021?
Easily, I'd say. Yeah.
Let's have a look. I'm on the podcast website here to see when it was. We were hoping initially to get it done in what, a year?
Within a year, yeah.
Yeah, that's not working out.
Supporters, no.
That well. Okay, here we go. March 28, 2022. So it's a year and a half since, just over a year and a half, nearly 2 years since we went public with our plans for writing the book. How do you think we're getting on, Donal?
Actually, not bad. Not bad. People will be surprised to hear that we have done something in the intervening year and a half. So yeah, no, we can go through it, but like we've basically got the book divided into 3 parts, so that's a good place to start, I guess, in talking about it. So the first part is kind of what would you say? It's like a introductory stuff to some key concepts, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose like the structure of the first part, like we put out a provisional chapter structure on the web. I think it's on the website. We sent it to people, and I think it's on the website. We did that maybe over a year ago when we were putting together a book proposal. And that's one thing we need to talk about, actually. Publisher. Yeah. But we kind of listed about 26 chapters or something like that, and in the course of researching and writing, a lot of them chapters we feel will just collapse. So we, collapse into each other. So we kind of have the 3 general kind of parts. The first part, I suppose, is it's kind of like an introduction to the, I would say a few things. Introduction, like a general introduction, but like also, I've recently finished like a mammoth chapter on value theory. People would be delighted to hear a nice, easy start to the book, about 70 or 80 pages of value theory, and then a chapter on Marx and Engels' concept of capital of socialism and the theoretical development of socialism.
Like after Marx and Engels, the development.
Yeah, so the development of all the kind of major types and the theoretical development, and then we have we'll have a chapter on what we kind of feel like are the 2 main prongs of kind of like the entire analysis in the book, which is one is kind of like a value theory. And then the second one is kind of cybernetics. So a kind of an introduction to the cybernetic principles that we feel is most important, or kind of central, totally central to communism. So that's the kind of general structure, and an intro as well to the fundamental principles. So those kind of that's the first section of the book, which we have written to. What would you say? We have I would say 90%, 85% of that whole section of the book written to and edited to a really good standard.
Yeah, written and edited. So that's kind of, the editing is a lot of the work, more so than I expected. It's kind of like you write something, you're pretty happy with it, and then as you read over it, as the 2 of us read it together, a lot more comes out that kind of like, actually we have to go, paragraph by paragraph sometimes, and like just get
it's brutal. I've been brutalizing Donal. I've been driving him insane. It was taking us like an hour to of our combined, on a live stream, on a a Zoom call or whatever, to edit like one page. That's about how slow we are at editing. Are we even that fast?
Sometimes it's very fast, and other times it's really shocking.
I'm driving them mad. But when we get out the far side of it, it's gold. Like, we end up with really, really good stuff. Let's say hi to people in the chat here. We have a few people here. We got Jay Ardle, Greta, Alex Marquez, Emil, Auxiliary Statements, and the Initiative Demokratische Arbeitszeitrechnung. The German dudes in the IDA, big fans of the fundamental principles. So that's kind of like this first section we've kind of done, which is like, and Jerker Sandquist, hi Jerker. That's like the first section that we have written. Like, we've done all the research, and we have written we've written about 85 to 90% of it to a really high standard, hoping to finish that section completely this month, hopefully. So that's one section of the book is really very close to complete. The second section then, Donal, do you want to take that, because you've been doing a lot of the work on that section?
Yeah, this has been what's been occupying me for the last good few months. So the second section really is critiques of the stuff that's out there at the moment, and we feel that it's important not just to kind of give our positive building on the GIC cybernetic stuff, but also to say, okay, what's there now, the main things that are out there, and that kind of builds on the first section, because we talked about what the major influences are in the development of socialism after Marx. So then you can see, okay, well, they went towards market socialism, for example. You can see how developed into it, into different schools, central planning, communizer theory. Today we've a little bit on that, and you can get the picture. Yeah. So basically we just go through using those kind of dual lenses: value theory on the one hand, cybernetics on the other, and show why those things are basically from one or the other, or both, just not viable, or they might be viable to some point, but they wouldn't be socialist, or they wouldn't be capable of remaining a socialist. Kind of thinking about how they have their own developmental tendencies towards back towards capitalism, for example. So we talk about what kind of dynamics would do that.
Yeah, so like we're going to so we do a kind of an in-depth critique of, basically in this section is kind of like a critique section of like either things that have been tried in the real world, and analyzing them for their failures, but also seeing new proposals for like stuff like, say, Paricon, or towards a new socialism by Cockshot, or some of these more Neurathian inspired half-earth socialism, or probably, we probably won't put it in it and recognize it, but maybe the worst book ever written in the entire history of the planet, Aaron Bastani's fully automated luxury capitalism. Yeah, but like we'll go through, try not to be too snarky, but we're going to go through all these and give like a fair critique as we see it, and all of that, that's why the first section of the book is set up to actually get people to understand, like, how, what was Marx's, what was value theory, why did he go about doing it, like, and why it's important for communism, like why the insight into like how capitalism operates is kind of fundamentally needs to inform our ideas around the next mode of production, and here what's full and center in all these is like looking through these lenses, the value theory cybernetic lens at all of these different either actually tried things in the real world or proposed things, and pointing out like what I think, could get repetitive in the book because so many of them share these similar, very, very basic, problems.
Yeah, I think we can explicitly kind of break it down into there's the central planning aspect, there's the market socialist aspect, there's also kind of somewhat hybrid ideas around for example, Yugoslavia is a kind of got next to me here. We've obviously, for this part, the critique part of the book, we've been doing a lot of reading. That's
Hold that up there.
Splendor, Misery, and
Still,
Possibilities.
so people see
Yeah,
it. That's Splendor, Misery, and Possibilities. By who?
Yeah. It's a guy called Darko Suvin on Yugoslavia, and it's an interesting book because it doesn't just talk about what went wrong in Yugoslavia, but it kind of presents a theory as to how things could have gone in a socialist direction. And the basic idea is that, well, the workers' councils that were there in the Yugoslav companies should have controlled investment, and then things would have gone in a socialist direction. And to give a kind of example, what I meant before when talking about the directionality or whatever, or the kind of underlying tendencies in these kind of theories in a lot of what's out there at the moment, is it's not really possible for a commodity production economy like that, for example, like in Yugoslavia, to internalize that kind of egalitarian future or the kind of socialist future, because, for example, and this is just one reason of many that we kind of noted, the different productivities, the different companies, the different ability to attract profits from the market, to capture profits, will, in such a commodity production economy, mean that some companies are going to be profitable and others won't be profitable. And what you'll get is this kind of dynamic where, okay, let's say they all control production, all control investment together, that's some kind of higher level of recursion. There's an inherent conflict there, an inherent tension, right, between the companies who successfully, profitably reproduce themselves and the ones that don't, the ones that are loss making and struggling and so on. And you've got that internal obvious contradiction and tension where, in a commodity production economy, the profitable company is going to say, we're capable of running a profitable business. We need to be reproduced. The loss-making companies saying, no, we, in a socialist kind of ethos, we need to be reproduced, although we're loss-making. And you can see in a commodity production economy where things are for sale for money, and you get money by being profitable and being productive and so on, as opposed, in that exact sense,
individual sense.
In the individual sense that we understand by a commodity, by a capitalist economy. You can see the direction of travel. You can see who's going to win that argument, who has the power in that conversation, and you can go sort of in depth and see how that played out in reality, where in the actual historical fact, what happened was precisely that, but from a different perspective, where the investment to the different companies being able to be successfully reproduced and expanded became the focal point, rather than the companies having their own control over investment and even having that conversation. As it actually happened, you had like a whole financial sector set up in Yugoslavia above the heads of the local government departments, who were able to be very profitable by financing only the successful firms. And that's totally so the law of value and the kind of capitalist dynamics, they'll come through, is the kind of point we make again and again. And right. You can see the different historical examples. They'll assert themselves, and they'll drive everything back to a full capitalist system.
Right. Like if reproduction is not communal, it's going to end up in capitalism, is the general point, isn't it? Oh, right. Yeah. Sorry. Right. Yeah. So we critique pretty much everybody we can get our hands on as well as we can. So including like syndicalism, anarchist kind of stuff, communizer stuff, Paracon, News Towards New Socialism, Central Planning, Market Socialism. Have I left anything out?
I think that's all of them. that we're going to focus on, at least. Yeah.
I've read all. I think probably more me. You've read a lot of the market socialist and stuff. I've kind of read all the new proposals out there I can get my hands on. Which we'll probably only analyze one or two of the major ones because the same basic problems appear again and again. But I've read, what other ones have we read? Oh, somebody like Alec Noves, The Economics of Feasible Socialism, or that is it Saros? Is it David Saros guy?
Mm.
Read that. I've read so many. I kind of stacks of books here, but again and again we just see the same stuff. So we have read quite a lot of stuff. I think this section of the critique is probably where we have put most of our actual research work. Would that be a fair point?
Yeah, definitely. And the only contemporary research I've done, as you said, your focus has been more on the contemporary. My focus has been more on historical. For example, the last few months I was doing a lot of work on the anarchist tradition, on Proudhon and Bakunin and all these. So reading a lot of that, and it's actually very interesting. Maybe that'll be, I think, one of the most interesting critique chapters. The only contemporary one that I was focusing more so on was the communizers tradition or school, and obviously that's something that we don't have any reference where we can say, oh, such and such a place were communizing in the sense that they mean. So we're basically, that's a critique that's really focused on the academic work that's there on what they've written. So. And I would say, again, we always try to be fair. We try to be fair in these critiques. We try to
we should never be fair. We should always.
We shouldn't, but we try to anyway.
We should be uncharitable. Yeah.
If you give them the maximum charitability, and if you say this is their view as they would want it to be presented, that's when you can do, I think, a really good critique, which doesn't leave any wriggle room. Anyway, you can say that's not really what we meant. No, it's you wanted to give the strongest possible case for the people that you're arguing against.
Well, so we just had a question in the chat, so let's bring it up as a kind of a way for us to introduce the third section of the book. So Jerker asks, is there anything in the GIC model that you think is really problematic that needs to be changed / patched? So it's a good question, Jerker. So our third section of the book, so we have that intro kind of lens section, cybernetic value theory, social relations kind of a lens. We have critique of actually existing trials and theoretical notions of socialism. And then our third section, then the kind of is basically us taking the GIC and basically building it out or changing it where we feel there has been things that need to be changed there. So Donal, what would you say is where would you say we differ with the GIC?
There's probably a few areas. One that comes to mind immediately is that in deciding on new investment, what they call expanded reproduction, they have a specific view that they put forward. GIC. I'm not sure it is in both editions or just the first or second edition of GIC, but anyway, it's in there. And what they put forward is the idea that that at the highest level of recursion, the workers' councils, who are, you've got this kind of recursive structure where they elect people up. And at that highest level of recursion, decisions of investment are made where they break down investment by into blocks. So you might have 10% for, I don't know, whatever, the production of computer equipment and other technical things, and then 10% for something else, and 5%, and so on and so on. And then those block grants, if you like, or block investments for expanded reproduction, they filter down through the different recursions down to the lowest level, down to small production units and so on. And to us, that's we think that wasn't very well. They didn't spend a lot of time on it, so it possibly was sort of an afterthought for them. I think it didn't seem to be very well thought through, and we went in a more dynamic direction where we are more interested in seeing how expanded reproduction happens at the different levels of recursion, kind of automatically, how it grows out of normal economic life, if you like, how there can be basically tying into the idea of that the production is happening at a certain level from different production units and at different levels of recursion, and then growing out of that, you can see things about the capacity that's there in terms of what's being produced, and that sort of capacity utilization as one of the main indicators for the growth of the production system for expanded reproduction. So one of the ways that I put it is to say, in the socialist economy, production doesn't grow like in capitalism, but production is grown.
Right.
It's
there isn't maybe even in like probably China, there isn't like this, the state doesn't decide what accumulation rate is, right? That it's a dynamic thing within capitalism, that it itself decides, the mode of production itself decides, how it accumulates or what is required and how it grows. And I think we're looking towards essentially a similar dynamic, self-organized approach to accumulation, where like realistically in the GIC was a very crude, we've decided 10%. Now everybody, here's 10%, do with it what you will, as opposed to, those parts of the economy that are expanding or contracting will receive flows of funds, or will have funds shifted away from them as society directs through its own organic development.
Yeah, so it should be obvious, but just to put it in a clear way, there might be some areas of some recursion, geographical recursion, where it makes sense for something to grow by 40%, and there might be a different place where the correct, if there is a correct, it's subjective, of course, but where the what's judged to be appropriate is not 40%, it's 3% or whatever, and that's totally fine, right? And the system should have enough variety in it that it can accommodate that very easily. So,
right.
That's one point. Yeah.
That to me is what springs out as the part that was most glaringly wrong in the fundamental principles. What else would we look? Is there anything else that jumps out off the top of our head?
Not off the top of my head, but something may come to me as we go on. Some of the things are more like elaborations and building on, rather than saying the GSC were wrong. I think we very rarely say
that. Right. And I think what we would say as well is that, like, I think that we've come to some very fundamental understandings out of developing the ideas slightly further. There are these like first, second order things that come out of it, and sometimes they've led us back towards what we feel are very fundamental things towards how a socialist society will operate. Things within, so by that we mean things within the superstructure, right? As in elements of the mode of distribution, which work to maintain the system and to direct productivity to get from a lower to a higher stage. So I feel like it's hard for us to get into them in any great detail, because we won't be eloquent and we have to write it right. We've yet to write it eloquently and fully formulated, but generally towards getting to this kind of the key contradiction was one of the contributors to helping us write the book asked a great question. One of the patrons was Avatai, I think, asked this great question about the contradiction between, how would I put it? The contradiction between, say, like, you know what I'm going to say. You'll say it more eloquent than me. Come on, give me this contradiction, Donal.
I'm sure I won't, but the basic the basic idea is, look, you've got a labor time economy, and in a labor time economy, your ability to access, according to the labor token idea, we assume that listeners are more or less aware of it. That there's basically a change from one form of labor to another, right? So the standard, the measure, the standard of participation in the economy is labor time, and your ability, at least personal consumption, because there's also the thing of collective consumption, but your personal consumption aspect is regulated according to your participation, right? So that being the case, where that's the measure, the question was, does that not conflict with people's with a drive towards higher productivity, right? Because if you've got higher productivity, you're going to have lower personal consumption,
Right. So you're working in a factory, you get a new highly productive machine. It actually takes away hours that you're going to be able to work, right? Instead of having obviously we want to get rid of hours work, but your personal ability to consume, right? Like, we're all in favor of the economy becoming more productive, and we have to work less in abstract. But when it's in particular for the individual worker, and suddenly his hours are cut in half because of this new machine, and he has, have the ability for him to consume, how do we negate that key contradiction? Because that was a contradiction I think we saw in actually existing socialism as well.
Right. Exactly. In our case, it wouldn't even be, of course, it wouldn't be the case that a machine, for example, in that simple example, like that a machine would be imposed on anyone. We're not saying that, but we're saying, where would even the positive drive be for someone to want the machine to come to their workplace and make in a way, you could say, okay, their free time will be expanded, but they may want more personal consumption in that situation, and it may not be something that's natural then, that there would be this drive towards higher productivity, not to say higher output, which may not be needed, but higher productivity that any viable mode of production is going to need if it's going to overcome the current one, which kind of places productivity above all. So
sorry, just a quick question here from Emil. Can someone like me, no budget, doing it in their free time, translate the book once it comes out? And when does it come out? Well, absolutely, Emil. Yeah, you've been on to me before, 100%. Like, once we get things ready I'll be sending some chapters over here. Great to have a Dutch version. Herman as well, who translated the Fundamental Principles, has offered to do a German translation as well. We've been sending him a couple of the early chapters that we've got to a decent state, and he volunteered for that, so that'd be amazing. So I suppose we haven't, maybe we'll just say it here while we're talking about this stuff, is we haven't yet actually approached a publisher yet. And the reason for that was, even though about a year ago we actually wrote up our publisher proposal, but I was talking to a friend of mine who's like a proper like literary author here in London, and he was saying, you are better getting more of it written before you try and get a publisher, because he was talking about the nature of the work, as in, like, like over the last couple, since we announced we'd write the book, done, like, I think our ideas have, I personally think our ideas have developed and become an incredibly more rich than what they were, say, a year and a half ago. And like, for us, it'd be a shame. We want to feel like, personally, I think, like, when we get about half of the book written to a good bit and we're on the very getting to the closing stretches, we'll be looking for publishers. So it may be not that far off, in a couple of months maybe, or something. When is it going to be written? I'm giving myself like about another 9 months to try and get it done. Like, so that's when we're looking to, I feel like we should be done in 9 months. When will it be out? Well, that depends on, like, publishers, or if we self-publish, or whatever happens. If we self-publish, it will go out whenever we're ready. But if it's a publisher, I would like to get a publisher just for get more people to read it. It's easier. You get some more marketing. So that would be that what I'd say for I would say about the those ideas. Sorry, that's what I would say, Emil, about when it's going to come out. I know it's basically like the book is nuclear fusion, right? It's always 50 years off, right? So that's what I'm going to say. Some other major insights, like one major thing I think it's funny when we're writing the book, every so often we have these long arguments that go on over a couple of days that we've had many times and we've thought we've resolved them. And then they come back up and then we've kind of either forgotten what we argued for previously, or we kind of figure out we haven't resolved some of the discussion or the arguments we're having. But like one thing that we've kind of really ended up finding being as fundamental for us that is the role of recursion, like the cybernetic thing from the VSM, of nested self-similar institutional forms, organizational forms. And that's something as well that we have find is like really, really absolutely central to our what we're going to add to the GIC. What do you reckon? Don't say something.
Yeah. Right. I was just thinking about another one of the books we had been reading. So I'll just segue into it. Sure, that is there's a book called what is it again? The accounting one. Value.
Here, let me put it up here. It's a brilliant book that we've just recently read in the last couple of days, last few weeks. Accounting for Value in Marxist Capital by Rob Breyer. Hoping to get him on the show. I've emailed him. I've emailed people to email him. So hopefully I'll get him on the show in the next few weeks. So you talk. You keep going,
sure.
Don.
So the point I wanted to make on that is just he puts forward basically a very, very compelling model for a kind of description of how a capitalist economy has these kind of layers of accountability, like a multi-level control system, kind of, like a loops inside loops, where you have what Marx calls and what he calls total social capital, like the investment funds, the banks, and the stock market, and so on. And they set this kind of general rate of return that they demand from companies, and they're able to do that because they have this big portfolio of different types of companies, and they can adjust for all the different risks that are involved in different things. And so they're able to come out with this kind of like unified kind of rate of return that they demand. And then he kind of shows how the accountant's job, financial accountants, have a job of kind of dissecting that and seeing, are companies doing that, what's being demanded of them, that have these investors and loans and so on. And then the management accountants within the firms have to make sure that the way they actually account is very interesting. It's like socially abstract labor, not their own concrete labor, but socially abstract labor. Is it actually meeting the labor productivity levels that are required to get those rates of return? So you have this kind of amazing control system that's in capitalism, and it's based on these loops of accountability where the managers of companies are pulling their hair out trying to get this demanded rate of return, and that's what they're always trying to do. And to do that, they have to always be changing what they're doing and so on. And coming over to the socialist side of it then, a key part of socialism is to have kind of recursive accountability in the same way, we feel. Now, not in the same way in the sense of it being alienated labor and so on, but in the sense of...
Or based on the rate of profit.
Right, or anything like that. But nevertheless, social accountability, a recursive social accountability, that you have these certain objective understanding of things like labor productivity and capital utilization and different things that are objective about the economy, and that you're able to have production plans that are, you could say, conditioned by society. So when production plans are submitted, when they filter through the layers of recursion, when they're aggregated with other production plans, so you can see productivity in a town, you can see it in a county, you can see it in and so on. You can see it at different levels.
Yeah.
In an industry, you can see it across different ways, and society is able to recursively condition itself. Things, these kind of production conditions can be accepted by society. They can be rejected. Maybe they can be accepted with conditions, and so on. So you can kind of get a feel for how, because the labor is social, and it's social now in a non-alienated way, but it's still social kind of labor based on an abstract measures of labor. Labor is the society is able to come to terms with itself. It's able to negotiate with itself, if you like, and condition itself and find what are the social norms, what exceptions have to be made for people in particular areas with particular in their own particular circumstances. So that can all be accounted for in terms of building up this picture of social labor and making it actually and making it work at a social level. So I would say that's one of the, that's a key thing compared to almost anything else that's out there in terms of either sort of market socialist trying to use the familiar mechanisms,
the tools of capitalism to be socialist.
Right, to be socialist, or sort of central planning, as the Yugoslav economists, one of them called it the crude state monopoly or whatever, where you run into all kinds of cybernetic problems with it, which we go into a lot.
Yeah, no, so a huge amount of what we're kind of get into, probably from day one, Donal, when we started talking to each other 3 or 4 years ago, kind of the questions you would always ask me, and I would go, "Oh, why is he asking me this? Don't ask me these annoying questions, Donal." But it was a lot of it was about how do the basic idea of how do we determine what directly social labor is, right? How do we so a fundamental part? It sounds quite boring for I think to hopefully the book won't be so boring as maybe some of the words that we say here is, but it's like society has to determine with itself what it deems as social labor, right? If you're a shoe factory and the society is saying, "Hey guys in the shoe factory, this much output with those machines, that's good. If you're doing way less than that, that's shit. We're going to have to get involved. If you're doing more than that, whoa, that's brilliant," right? But so how one goes about determining what social labor is, and all that entails, is fundamental. And, again, those two together, and recursion, and how recursion works to a society to condition itself towards productivity is that's a large part of what we'll be writing in section 3. I feel between that and that kind of basic understanding of the society as a self-organized, self-regulating economy as well. It's all of a total. It's all of the same thing. But that is the way we're approaching it. Very much in opposition to market socialist kind of capitalist social relations. The book, the third section, is really an interrogation of what are communist social relations, at base. I think that's going to go on.
Before you go on, is just one other little thing just to make people kind of think about as well is one of the big critiques that Herman had of the communizers. He's written some very interesting back and forth with them in German, but of course you can translate them if you need to, on some of their ideas, is the fact that without any kind of unit of account, without this kind of what they say abstract labor is sort of capitalism in just in its purest form or whatever, but he makes the very, very convincing argument that without a cost benefit possibility, without the ability to say, we want this bridge over the river, but we could also do it in a different way, and we can compare these things through a cost benefit analysis. So it's actually a cost, it's a social cost to us. We know if we choose option A, it means we can't do lots of other things. and we can see that very clearly. That's it's essential, right? It's not something you can do without. And
right.
in our thing, just to finish, we have that cost, right? We have it built in, but in a different way than it would be in private companies. So we're not suggesting that this social conditioning is only on the basis of benefit. No, it's cost and benefit, and it has to be.
Right, yeah, and we should point out, like, as in, there's plenty of quotes out there, like, Marx saying accounting will be even more important in socialism than capitalism, right? And like, that the problem with capital is not that labor has been abstracted and that there are, like, we can quantify things. It's not the problem, right? The problem is alienated labor and exploitation and rents and usury and all the rest of it. And we make the argument in the book, but like that idea of going to straight distribution based upon need with no need for accounting or looking at how things work is a completely non-materialist, idealist notion. It's certainly not Marx's, and it's not a point about it being Marxist or not. It just doesn't make sense. And I think another, like, so fundamental as well to the third section, I'd say, is like, what is planning? Right, I think that's a fundamental point about what we'll be making in the book. Like, what does it mean to plan, right? I've had the misfortune of having to go through 29,000 pages of Marx and Engels' collected works and looking to see what they actually said about planning. And people are going to be shocked. Like, Marx and Engels never even mentioned the term central planning, central planners, none of this stuff. It was never mentioned, right? So what we're getting towards is, like, what does it mean to plan? Because in capitalism we have planning, right? But in it's isolated private production planning, private property based planning. And what we're looking towards in a socialist economy is planning, right? But that's cooperative planning. And I think that's something, and juxtapose that fundamentally with central planning. But that is not for us to say that plans are all, low-level plans of producers. Planning can be done at any recursion or scale required within the economy. Right. So the issue that everything has to be centrally planned is something that we are going to be fighting hard against, and also fighting hard on the other side or as well against planning as an economic category. Planning is not an economic category. That's something that we'll be making plain in the book. Like, there isn't a theory of plans or anything that has anything to do with social relations, be they feudal, capitalist, or communist.
Yeah, and in our chapter on central planning, we talk quite a lot about what did some of the proponents, let's say Stalin and these kind of people, when they were talking about economic problems of socialism, right? And they very much elevate the idea of planning to a sort of to an economic category by itself, right? Whereas and then to the contrary, they elevate the idea of competition between capitals as sort of as what capitalism is, right? That it's fundamentally, it's competitionism. It's not capitalism. And if you look at we're not the first to say this. Other people have said this, but actually, what the capital relation is, means of production. Do they act as capital, right? That's what determines whether something is capital, whether economic system is capitalist. So if you have the means of production acting as capital, if you have labor power acting as capital, whether there's one owner or multiple owners is a kind of interesting aspect of it, and a kind of you can look at which way has been historically more what combination of state planning and decentralized planning in capitalist social relations works better, but But there's a category mistake here in trying to assume that socialism has something to do with the economy being planned in a room or something. That's and it ties into cybernetics as well, of course, that whole problem.
Fundamentally. Alex in the chat asks, how do you account for non-industrial jobs such as software engineering and the service sector? I'll just say there's no problem here at all. There's absolutely no problem. Labor time is labor time. So we'll deal with it in the book, but there's nothing special that sticks out about them. Unless you want to say something, Donal.
No, in fact, we may or may not, but I think we might include a kind of chapter which gives a more grounded view of the system, possibly from the perspective of a service sector production unit, so that you can have a more intuitive feel for that. But yeah, I would say it doesn't pose any special problems.
Yeah, no, like we've been one of the chapters we had an idea for a day in the life one, but any time I've read a day in a life chapter in any of these socialist planning books, they're just so they should just be set on fire. So I don't know if we will end up doing it. We might leave it to people's imagination. I've since completely gone again. I've read so many of them now, it's enough to make me want to shoot myself in the head. What was I going to say here then? We must have had something else to say. So we've also we have one of the earlier chapters will be dealing with kind of like the development of like socialist ideas and theory and all that and calculation debate and stuff like that. But like one element of our book will literally be us showing all the critiques that were in the socialist calculation debate against labor time planning. We just show how we're able to solve all of those problems, how we're able to solve Neurath's problems, non-labor inputs and how to like account for them. So we're going to be able to deal with, we're going to show, I think we have like a number of like, I think it's just going to be incredibly tight, as in all these, we will be able to answer all of the key shit that's thrown against the wall against labor time accounting by in all the theoretical debates. We have answers for all of those, and I think, what's interesting is some of the answers that we ended up coming up with for some of these things, we have kind of found, we found in kind of like bastardized form, not particularly correct in other places, but like it's kind of funny how the same similar type solutions were found to problems. There's one particular like very famous article which kicked off the socialist calculation debate. What's that one? I always forget the name of it. It's the two-part. It's published a two-parter with what you call the guy, the market socialist guy, Lange's one. What's your man's name again? Do you remember?
I don't. Taylor, is it?
Yes, Fred Taylor.
Yeah,
Fred Taylor had a like a kind of seminal paper that kicked off the American side, I think, of the calculation debate. But he we actually find out one of our solutions to some of the problems around natural inputs, non-human labor inputs, actually nearly identically matches some of the arguments that were made within the calculation debate, but not exactly. So it's interesting to see how these problems kind of and answers, like solutions to these things, they nearly get it. They're just not coherent. But I think we have probably quite a number of things in that section 3 that are, I would think, I think it's fair to say, Donal, it's hard to know when, maybe people will say to us, this is all bullshit, but they feel like that they're kind of kind of major new elements to the area. Would you say that's fair?
You mean as a totality, or
Yeah, well, I don't know, but I think the individual things are new as well.
Yeah. I think like one of the main things that people come away with when they read GIC is they kind of, let's just say there are a number of questions that are left hanging, like they're really clearly unless they're addressed, you would say it's a non-viable schema. It doesn't make that much sense. But then you have to recall that what they were trying to do was just say like the fundamental principles, right? So they were just saying, here's some of the main aspects of the accounting of a socialist society. I think that's all they were trying to do. So that was their project at that time. And I think what we are doing here is kind of to show, at least in the third part of the book, what the answers to those are. They may not be the perfect answers, the ones that we give, so don't take it as like gospel or anything, but they're answers that we can stand over and say these problems are, they're not insurmountable at all. There's like, very, very, very reasonable answers to them. Solutions that would be like, that anyone can see are, would be viable, or, and not only would be viable, but make the broader point that they can be solved in different ways, So no, I mean, I think hopefully it's a very optimistic book in that sense, that it adds a whole new category. People can say, yeah, this is definitely a good approach to a socialist economy.
So a few more questions in here in the chat. We got one from Emil. How would you respond in the book to the common argument that the labor time of a doctor can't be valued in the same way as that of someone flipping burgers?
Yeah, so that's probably we have a few different aspects to that, to the answer to that. It's absolutely correct that different types of labor are qualitatively different. And sorry, I don't know, am I frozen there? Can you hear me? Uh-oh. Oh, Tom is frozen. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah. I thought I was frozen. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think it was me.
Okay, nice. What were we saying? About labor time. It's absolutely correct that different types of labor are, of course, qualitatively different, and this is one of the. It's actually interesting. It's one of the objections that was given by that guy who's the Austrian school guy. He reminded me of his name, and now I forget again.
Donal.
Lavoie. And he kind of says, well, look, in order to figure out what the correct amount of labor that should be taken into consideration for things, you'd have to figure out qualitatively what that labor is worth to different people and so on. But so that's kind of, there's a valuation aspect to it, which we would say he kind of messed up that argument, because there is a discussion about complex and simple labor, right? In terms of the cost of society of reproducing different kinds of labor, but that's not it. But there is a discussion about that. But in terms of, I think what you're more getting at in that question, which is the different types of labor from the perspective of the person doing the labor. So, for example, today we would say someone, maybe has a job, a single job, a primary job as being a doctor or a burger flipper. Then, yeah, absolutely. That becomes today you couldn't implement labor time accounting. In other words, in a capitalist economy, you couldn't do it because that obvious contradiction is there. You have a labor market, you have people being paid great, vastly different amounts of money in a labor market, and that's a reflection of the value of that labor to some extent, value in the sense of a capitalist economy. So in a labor time economy, there wouldn't be a labor market. So the thing would have to work differently in terms of how labor is actually undertaken in the economy. I don't know, do you want to talk about what's called the job complex, Tom, or as one aspect of that?
Yeah, this is something that we've taken from, which we think is pretty fundamental to the superstructure of a communist society, is people, which I think is a terrible name from Paracon, but a good idea, is the job complex, which basically people do their own fair share of the undesirable work, essentially, right? And that to us is kind of a given. And I think any socialist society worth its, or communist society worth its, worth its, what's that expression? Worth its metal? Is it something like that? Worth its metal. Will develop the individual. We will not have like a de-skilled, alienated working class and then a skilled practitioner class whose labor is skilled and does produce more value in capitalism. We will have more well-rounded. So the actual idea that it would be such a problem in communism is, I think, very much overstated. And if we get to actually, when we talk about labor time accounting, there's two aspects to labor time accounting, right? One is the distribution. Okay, how do we get to consume, right? I'm a doctor in labor time accounting communism. I'm a Dr. Donal because I'm really brainy. You're really thick, Donal. You are, well, what job would you like? Licking windows. Donal is licking windows, right? We're both getting there's the image. Now we're both getting the same the same pay for like the hours of licking windows and me doing open heart surgery, right? So that's a distribution element. But there is also like a production kind of element, where is it how we cost the prices of goods within the economy. Okay. And in capitalism, labor that is skilled produces value at a higher rate than labor that is produced by unskilled labor, right? Unskilled labor produces at a lower rate than high skilled labor, based upon the amount of investment in the reproduction of the skilled labor. If it takes twice as long to train a doctor than a window licker, they'll create the cost of society is twice, then they will produce value at twice the rate. That's Marxist theory. Okay, so we have a very simple way we'll show in the book about how you can account for costing the different, like the inverted commas value of the complex or skilled labor versus the unskilled labor in the products in socialism. Very simple way to do it. So the two elements there that we have distribution element, that's fine. We're a communist society. Everybody's going to get paid the same stuff. But then we have the differences in accounting the costs of those labor. And there's a very kind of simple, straightforward way of doing it that answers directly the problems that the Austrians put forward about the problems with labor time accounting in the socialist calculation debate.
Could I come in on that again just for a second, just before we move off? So just on the distribution side, you gave a really good, summation on the production side. A couple of little things to say on the distribution side. There is, within that job complex idea, a sort of objective aspect to it that we'll talk about more in the book, which is basically that it's not just to say that everybody does their fair share. There's actually an objective mechanism by which if you take on a certain kind of labor within the community, a certain kind of production activity, or of whatever kind, a certain kind of role doing something, that there's at the same time, well, there's different variations how it can be done, but you could say, for argument's sake, at the same time, you are also taking on to do a kind of labor that's that results in a balanced job complex. So the balanced job complex being a quantitative measure of the desirability of the labor, if you like. So there'd be an aspect there of a sort of self-balancing, right, within that. Another just point I want to make on it is what I do is what my background is process control engineering, right? And one of the things in process control, one of the problems that's often there is, and it's a peculiar kind of capitalist problem, is one of the things you really want is cross training. And we would want that in a socialist economy in a big way. So we would want lots of people to be able to do jobs that today are done by a very small number of people. And in cross-trading, for example, in a factory, you have some people working on particular machines, and they want to maintain their ability that they can only work on that machine, that only they and maybe one or two other people can do it, a particular activity. One of the things that we have in a place, I'm starting work there shortly, is machines. And what the guys do on the machines is they make particular parts which they can use to repair some of the other production machines. So it's kind of it's a very skilled job. Now, other people could be trained to do that kind of work, but the problem is those guys don't want that. They don't want to be expendable in that way, and it's actually tied into their union contracts that they won't be, that cross training won't happen, that they will be the people who will be doing that job, right? And so that's kind of a peculiar thing about capitalist social relations, that they don't want other people to be able to do what they can do. And so a lot of those things are things that we'll be able to get past in socialism, where it won't be at all to your disadvantage that other people can do what you can do, because that won't be the basis that your participation in social labor is being judged on. One final thing I just want to say, just before I finish, is we did an interesting bit of study about Venezuela, which, as everyone knows, the economy there is so bad that millions of people have emigrated and so on, for various reasons. The economy there is that bad. But one of the interesting kind of experiments that's been happening there in recent years is this thing of communes, where people who have noticed that the economy is so bad that it's impossible to even live in a normal way have self-organized certain types of economic activity, right? So, which is an understandable thing to do in those circumstances. And when you go to self-organize economic activity, what they found was on a basis of not having a labor market, on a basis of not operating in the context of a labor market. So they were trying to do this as a community. What they found was the only way that they could proceed was to have what is not labor tokens, because they were dealing with money, and sometimes they made their own kinds of money and stuff. But anyway, it was money. What they found was the only way that they could proceed was on the basis of remuneration, which was common, which was equal. And the reason for that was when it was suggested that certain people would earn more than others, the thing wouldn't work at all. People said, "My time is as good as yours. I'm not going to participate in this at all if you're saying your time is worth more than mine." And in the end, that was the only way that they could do it. So if we are imagining a socialist revolution, transition, whatever, one thing that you may very easily come across, regardless of our opinions about labor tokens, as being the only appropriate way to measure participation, is that people might very well refuse to participate. They might say, "Why am I going to be your secretary, making half of what you make? I'm not going to do that." So I think that's also another aspect you have to take into account, that in that kind of socialist transition, that can very well be the only thing that works.
Right, and it was interesting because I don't know if anyone remembers, I interviewed a guy called Sorrel who might be listening here today. He emailed me saying that he'd try and join in, but he was working in a commune in America, a couple of different communes for like 10 or 15, 20 years. And he was saying, when they tried to, they were experimenting with different things. So one was like pay more for like undesirable work. And what they found is that it didn't work at all when you're on a commune. Like that, people would start gaming the system and then not do it, and then try and eke out even higher differential wages. And they became a game, and they just reverted to the flat thing, and it was way more actually user friendly for the commune, which is interesting. And also, I don't know if you mentioned it, but about there's kind of these, about the job complex, which I think we got to give a better name to. It's a terrible name, but the these objective dynamics whereby, one of the things in the shift from the lower to the higher stage is that we reorient the nature of work. We get rid of like alienated labor, like the means of production, the built infrastructure itself changes. How we live, how we work changes. But also, like if when society, like say for example, like some of us have to work in the sewers or something, or we have to spend a few days a year working in the sewers, like the fact that everybody has to share this stuff means that accumulation will be directed towards there's objective reasons for uh, eliminating those types of very deeply alienated or undesirable types of work that doesn't exist in capitalism. And so like there's objective dynamics that come out of that are really, really, I think, important. Some good comments in here. Yara Handala said, within a post-capital society, in what sense is value? So yeah, value still a property of the product or service when it's simply a use value and so not a commodity. Yeah, when I said value, I put my I put inverted commas fingers up, because like there's a quote by Marx. I think it's Marx. It's either Marx or Engels. I think it's Marx, and he says like the only sense in which value, inverted commas, he says value exists in communism or socialism is in the sense is that like we can quantify labor time, and we can give it like a price, a labor time price, and that's the only sense. Like so, and that's very, very important, right? Because it's not the fact that you can quantify something that makes it bad, it's the fact that the social relations that underpin that quantification. So definitely value doesn't exist, right? Absolutely fundamentally, we're talking, that's fundamental to the whole idea of the book, is like, value exists. We literally, most of the critiques is basically saying of all actually existing experiments and theoretical ideas is saying value here, value still exists, value still exists, value still exists, and that's the generic, that's the fundamental point. So good to point it out. I think I used my inverted commas, but if I didn't, well spotted. Jake's second name. I'm wondering if you're going to write about the money credit transition period, interaction with non-communist countries in terms of needed materials, brain drain as an issue or non-issue. Yeah, so that's a good question. We definitely will be writing about, well, like, it's interesting. Like one of the things that we didn't actually mention, one of the things I didn't mention earlier was the that thing that we will critique will be CyberSyn project in Chile with Stafford Beer, which the more I've read about that, the more exceptional it is. It really it stands alone for me as the best attempt at a socialist or communist society. I think what it was lacking for is any economic foundation or basis, but organizationally we have got a fuck ton to learn from it. And I would say that transitionally we have a fuck ton to learn from it. And this idea of a transition that is in the general diseased socialism versus communism debates, that you need 100 years to get to communism or whatever, that's for us. We will be saying some bits, but it's just to us not a major idea and a major problem. For us, the transition period, look what they did with CyberSyn, with a couple of teletext machines in the middle of all manner of craziness going on, that they got the butts and they got a lot of a system up and running that could be, if we had a better political economy underpinning it, that would institute socialist relations. So I would say transition for us, I think it's safe to say, is like a project. It's like a 3, 5, 10 year transition periods whereby we get everything up and running, and then we're in lower stage communism. That's kind of fundamental. Do you want to say something about the non-communist countries? Because that's another thing that we will be actually hitting.
Yeah. Well, just first on the transition period one, I would say we don't want to presuppose anything too much.
Fundamentally, yeah.
like there's a lot that everyone could have a different opinion about that, about the way that you do the transition. In fact, in that same guy we had mentioned before, he had Accounting for Value. He has another book called Accounting for History, and he puts forward his own, what he says from day one transition to a labor time system. And I have to read it again. I'm not quite sure everything he was getting at there, but basically, let's just say that there's a lot of different plausible and not so plausible ways that you could approach it, and we probably don't want to like presuppose it too much. Yeah, we just want to kind of say that I don't know. I'm not sure if we will actually give any opinion on that. What do you think?
On which on
the actual transition, one way or the other.
Like I think beyond saying that, I feel like beyond saying like we can show like what's involved in what you need for a socialist society to get going, and then like transitioning from A to B, personally, then it's just like you have to institute production plans, you have to get your general ledger set up, you have to get your points of sale all working on labor tokens. Like there's these literally practical things that you would have to do. You have to get your recursion levels of organization structure, right?
Yeah. The associated production. So there's definitely
producers and how they structure themselves. You have to set up these organizational forms. I mean, these are like things that happen, when Ukraine wants to join the EU, they have to do a whole series of organizational shifts in the economy. Or when Ireland wanted to join the euro, you had to do stuff, and you lay out your plan and you can move towards it. Obviously, it's in the middle of a post-revolutionary situation or semi-revolutionary situation, so it's not just like sit down with a project manager and get it going. But it's not this 100-year process, right? To install socialist or communist social relations is something that is done in a post-revolutionary period. Doesn't go on for 100 years. It's a project that gets done and then it gets set up and away you run. That's our general. I don't think we'll be saying too much more outside of that, what we're just saying here, because then it's historical and it's, shit happens in real life, how does stuff actually get there. But that's the general idea.
Yeah, I would say we might even have something in common in terms of saying there about like, the communizers talk about communization being a process or whatever. I mean, we don't agree with them on anything else maybe, but we do agree with them that it is kind of a process type or a series of processes that you can define the processes, even if you don't know how they'll happen.
Right.
So we could say.
I think of like, changing over from like all the bank software and everything that needed to change to go from, say, like the punt to the euro. They were massive projects, multi-year projects, right? Every point of sale, every associated producer, every factory has to have an organization, and they have to collect and organize their planned production and have like organizational structures to do it with other similar producers, and so on and so forth. And the agreement between the commune and the producers as to what is directly social labor. So these processes, right? These all have to be put into place. But it's not a developmental process, as in the economy needs to grow by a certain amount of GDP, which is typically how you hear about socialism translates in this kind of Stalinist idea to communism based upon, now we're so productive. It's nothing to do with that, right? We could, if we could click our fingers in the morning and we could skip all that revolution and stuff like that, you could say, this is, we could be socialist in the UK and Europe in the morning. This gets into some of the stuff here. We're talking about non-communist countries in terms of materials and stuff. Yeah. So we have thought about that. Yeah, we have yet to write the chapter on that. But we've definitely thought about that, and we will be doing stuff on that. And I think a lot of this ties into, one thing we're kind of not getting into in the book so much is like political strategy or anything like that. It's really a book about, communist social relations and economic, system, as opposed to a strategy of how we get there. Like we don't have anything to say practically on that, as in, not that we don't have ideas, but it's another book, one that we kind of have semi plans to do after this one if it ever gets there. So some of that will interact with some of these issues you're talking here. So, but we do hope to address them. Donal.
Yeah, and I think we'd give probably to that second part of the question a kind of similar answer to the first one, in the sense that, yeah, we don't have a strategic kind of view on how to deal with non-communist parts of the world, let's say, if there's blocks, in that sense. But we do have that kind of social relations view, and those will be the kind of answers we give. So, as far as, for example, if there is a melt, right, kind of a exchange rate between currencies and labor tokens, so there is an economic interaction. If that is the case, or I mean, I think it would be the case, one way or the other, it would have to. Then there's certain things you can see from that are kind of obvious. So if, for example, a foreign buyer wanted to buy things in the labor time economy, right, which would be, again, this kind of the general ledger system, as the GIC talk about, what they would have to do is they would have to part with their what would otherwise be investment capital into the circuit of capital, right, in global capitalist market. They'd have to part with that in order to get the use values that they want from the socialist economy, and then that money would no longer then be, that value, as it were, would be taken out of it would no longer be possible to use as capital, So there's you can have kind of insights based on how it would interact in a kind of that kind of broad social relations way. You can say, okay, what are the logical results of these interactions? But I think that's as far as we go. We wouldn't get into the strategy of, if X country did that, what would we do?
Yeah, like, and one thing we'd say is like that, like the foreign exchange won't be usable in a communist area. Yeah. So more than likely, what it will lead to is types of, like for both parties involved, the non-communist and the communist area. Well, let's not go into it. It's quite complicated. There's stuff like you could have drains. So like literally, we could be forced into situations. Quite, like say, for example, oil, right? A monopoly product that's not based on labor times. And it's got basically a monopoly price, say, in Saudi Arabia, and we're having to buy from it. That can actually act as a drain. Like we have to pay more labor tokens, or we have to sell things to them below actually the price of labor. It's a cost to our society. You got our hands in it. So there's lots of dynamics that can go on there that have to be teased out. But I don't think there's any fundamental problems. I think with respect to like some of this stuff is like, I think fundamentally that we haven't really said about is like that, like fundamental to any notion of communism being an actual mode of production and not just a temporary flash in the pan disaster economy is that, like, if we're to take historical materialism seriously, it's got to be more productive than capitalism. It's got to free the fetters of production. Right. So when it comes to stuff like the brain drain and things like this that Jake is asking here, that's inherently tied into the productivity and the freedom and the lack of alienated labor, right? The lack of exploitation, right? Fundamentally built into that development of it, and, so these things are all hyper tied in and linked. They're not, it's like full system view. So we will be trying to pick out these elements where and when we can. But definitely all of those things, to the extent that what we're saying is a viable system, we've got the right ideas. We don't see brain drain as a problem. Like, to the extent that what we're saying is dumb, right? And it's incorrect, right? And it leads to like the same experiences as, China or the Soviet Union or the East European states, well then it's not going to work, and that's kind of the way we approach it. Yara says Stalin approach has value still existing in post-capitalist society. Donal has written some stuff on this, so we've gone into some of that stuff, Yara. You'll be pleased to hear. John asks, how are tokens validated and when? Is there credit for labor still in transition to consumption? How are products that expire waste handled for vouchers if they're issued at production time? Yeah, no, all these practical issues we
Good
will.
question. Yep.
So say, for example, how tokens are validated and when. So it's like the idea we've associated producers. I work in a shoe factory. Our shoe factory is able to issue tokens, labor tokens, based on the work done by the people in that factory. So I clock in or whatever, I stay for 7 hours or 4 hours, I get credited. All the associated producers have the ability to create tokens. They're essentially the only people that have are the associated producers, right?
But of course, it's all subject to accounting controls. So yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So any spurious stuff gets caught up in the accounting control and the recursion elements that we talked earlier. So is there credit for labor still? Is there credit for labor still in transition to consumption? John, you'll have to ask that again and clarify. I don't know what you mean there. How are products that expire waste handled for vouchers? Yeah, that's that's just depreciation, as in any capitalism. As the use value deteriorates, the use value, the value in capitalism, it depreciates. The inverted commas for Yara value, the labor time content, the use value of it depreciates, and so you just handle it like that. It's fairly trivial, but yeah.
Although those are actually very interesting questions. If you speak to any of these kind of
not trivial. Trivial is
yeah, right. But trivial in the context, I think, of coming out of capitalism, because actually those are problems that are actually handled today by management accountants in a variety of ways. So, like, I was reading one, I can't remember, it's an operations research magazine, but they were talking about how it was Tesco, a guy from Tesco, I think, a big supermarket in the UK, for those that don't know, and Ireland and some other countries. But they deal with it basically just in terms of, like you just said, Tom, like in terms of depreciation. That's basically how they manage it, how they manage their prices. So like it's just a question of different types of food products depreciate at different rates, and that's the core. Everything that they do is built around that. And then a clothing store would have a very different thing, because their kind of products are seasonal and so on. So there's what I would say on that is the products themselves, are subject to depreciation, and that's basically, in one way or the other, the depreciation is how we handle the fact that is how we handle the fact of waste up until the point where it actually is wasted, in terms of it's written off, and then there's another process for dealing with that, because wasted products have to incur a cost, right? They have to incur a cost, just like we talked about the cost benefits.
So essentially, it just increases waste increases the price of the product. Okay. And, so like if we look at the average social reproduction time for the product, if there's products being wasted, that means the average price will be higher if there's wasted stuff. And just like in capitalism, the depreciation on the car is, I don't know, 10% a year. The depreciation on a head of lettuce is 25% a day. Okay. And that these things are just, capitalism deals with them, and socialism will deal with this stuff in a similar, in a straightforward accounting way. Yara saying value is emphasis, not square quotes. Yeah, no, don't mind me, Yara, just having a bit of fun. Sorry, we're flying through these. Emil, so what you're saying, Tom, is that we need a GitHub project today, preparing for this, running simulations, running practical experiments. Yeah, 100%. There's no reason why you could not have GitHub and have point of sale stuff all based on labor time. You could have financial accounting. You could have software built to facilitate the essentially product production agreements. All of this stuff. Yes, you know, there's
Can
loads
we
of work to be done.
can we give a shout out to the German lads who've actually built a very interesting application on exactly that theme? I don't know
Right.
if if they're in the chat.
They
Please,
are here somewhere.
yeah,
This is the
give it
IDA guys.
the IDA guys. Yeah,
So the IDA is a German group who are big into the labor time approach. They were really inspired by the fundamental principles, and they've built like you've actually had a good look at it. I wasn't. I
yeah,
think I was on holidays or something the day when they were showing us, or I couldn't make it. And do you want to say a little bit about it? It was very
yeah.
interesting.
So it's really interesting. So it's actually an application, and the idea is to show people how all of this works in practice. It's certainly on desktop. It may be on phone as well. The guys can confirm that. But it allows production units to make plans, to submit them, to have video chat meetings on the application, to have the average social production time calculated, and lots of other different features. The factor of individual consumption, for those who've read the GIC, they'll know what that is in terms of public spending versus communal consumption versus personal consumption. So it's a very advanced app, and they've already done a lot of good work on that.
Yeah. So, you know, fundamentally, I totally think so. Emil, there's loads of stuff that could be done. You know, a lot of it is just technical. Like, look at what they did in CyberSyn. A lot of it was literally writing the computer programs to talk up through the recursions, right, and to get their operations room working. Like with IT stuff nowadays, you know, that stuff becomes fairly trivial. As in, like, not to say it's not going to be a difficult thing to do, but it's like these are just projects that need to be implemented, and absolutely 100% can be done prior to any revolution. If it wasn't actually to be a revolution, that would mean you would have millions of people who would be active communists, and like it would seem to be a logical thing to just naturally occur for it to be done prior, you know, to actually speed things. And you know, to the extent we say anything about strategy in the book is like that, we're talking about non-alienated communist society, and we're like any political strategy that comes to trying to develop that in itself has to be a non-alienated political movement, right? And so we can imagine experiences of like actually recursions and figuring out the easiest way to just do these processes, similar processes politically, will have would also be used economically. Yara says he asked the Weekly Worker people to get Rob Byer. So this is Rob Byer's book. I just got to say, this book is fucking brilliant. This is like one of the best books I've ever read on Marx and stuff. It's not very well written, as in it's quite academic. It's kind of like a load of academic papers nearly, and it's kind of a bit it's not really for the non-academic reader. And there's probably 7 or 8 pages where it gets in a bit of mathsy stuff that's kind of just worth skipping, to be honest. But outside of that, if you can push on through it, you know, it's a really, really fantastic book.
I'd love to see like a popularization of that book, because I think it's so good. Like, it's brilliant. Yeah, very, very powerful presentation on the whole thing from an accounting perspective, the transformation problem and everything. So yeah, definitely have a read.
Yeah, so no 3 ruble system. That's correct, Jake. We got 3 labor times. We got the Irish labor time, which is way more highly valued, and it gets more consumption. Then we get everybody else except England, and they get medium consumption. And then the English have to actually be slaves in our system. That's how it goes. Sorry about that, lads.
It's objective.
It's objective. That's true. Yeah, historically objective. I feel like an ultra transparent economy, no IP, no nothing, open accounts, has got to be more productive. Yeah, and that's like one thing. I don't know how much we talked about this when we were doing the reading group on the fundamental principles, like last year or the year before or whatever. But you know, the fundamental like to this idea of the transparent economy is the general ledger, right? And if you think about it, like the entire economy is there, everything is in there, right? And like, so if society wants to plan say we want to do a high-speed rail network or whatever it is, right? You can just interrogate it. There should be simple tools like Google Maps. Anybody can. Any workers' council can just sit there and go, oh, like how much steel is being produced this year? Oh, 80% of capacity. So we need an extra 5%. Oh, that should be grand. We won't need to build any new, plants or whatever. We can just order it and away we go. Or if say, oh, other people are thinking of increasing production, and look, oh, between all of us combined, it's going to go up 25%. And so that means we're going to have problems, right? We're going to have to build new steel factories or mines or whatever, or we're going to have to prioritize who gets use of the steel, right? These types of decisions, all of this should be completely open and transparent, right? Self-organized, right? And like the idea that you can have a central plan which tells people what to do, that we've solved this thing, right? And we've solved all the equation, boys, and we've told everybody what they have to do and work. Like that is more alienated labor than even capitalism. Let's get it straight, right? So for us, it's like that. Not to say that tools towards planning that might be useful, that might be used to do this type of central planning can't be used on smaller scales, right? It's not about tech. It's more about it has to be an organic, self-organized process that can use techniques as required. Yeah, I think I said look there.
Another thing that says it's that guy Levois, is it, who wrote this Austrian economics guy, but he's
right. Another book that we
wrote a very good book.
Some brilliant books. Yeah, this one is that's a brilliant book. I'd recommend that to every Marxist to read. Not that it's totally correct, far from it, but it's brilliant.
It's brilliant on a very specific thing, I think, which is that he goes through the market socialist and the calculation debate kind of stuff, and it from the socialist point of view, it is kind of these market socialists. And what he shows really convincingly is that they misidentified the problem all along, and the Austrians had a part in that because of Hayek. But basically they misidentified the problem as some kind of computer problem, some kind of problem to be solved in terms of you've got given data and you need to solve simultaneous equations in order to find the right answers. And the problem, of course, is not at all that. The problem is that the data doesn't exist in the first place. The problem is that the data is created by the social relations of a capitalist economy. And you can really see that if you study the Soviet economy, that they didn't have those mechanisms. As my one of my lecturers in university in Russia would always tell us, year after year, we led the world in patent applications in the Soviet Union. We far more than the United States many years, including in the 1980s when the Soviet economy was falling apart. We had fantastic innovators and scientists, world-leading engineers, and yet there was a thriving black market in basic consumer products, in blue jeans and absurdly simple like commodities, and also in more complicated commodities, which the Soviets were also totally capable of producing, had all of the resources to do it, but couldn't do it, couldn't develop on the consumer side, and there are reasons for that. That's not a coincidence. And there's reasons why it was perpetuated, even though people knew these were big problems. They couldn't ever get over them in a systematic way. And the reasons are in the social relations, right? It's not a computer problem to be solved. And so that's, again, one of the main points of what we're doing, is to say we think that the GIC have the basis of a system which can allow for social relations, which will, as the commenter said, be far more productive than a capitalist economy, which again restricts creativity to a pretty small number of people, but still vastly larger than what was there in the Soviet economy.
Another one here from John. So just back on is deprecated wasted products incorporated at the social level as an aggregate or average, or should it be feedback to the individual firm, factory, or producer? Probably getting too far into it. The point is, John, is that you'd have all that information on the general ledger, exactly where all the waste is going. So, like, society will control that. Like you could imagine, like waste in certain shops more than others. They have bad fridges, like all that stuff would actually get, or they're ordering too much stuff, like all this stuff will if we take like a kind of a cybernetic approach, we have algorithmic signals, so like pain signals, when you have outliers and stuff going wrong, repeat offenders and certain stuff, like algorithmics will be made aware to, like, just very simple, like, warnings or whatever to those producers, or at a higher level that other producers condition them. So yeah, again, there's a lot, we'll get into a lot of stuff on that in the book. Like, the thing is, like, there's a fine balance in the book between getting in too far into the weeds of the individual, because some of these are things that will get sorted out. They will, these are not objective. You have to do it the way we say it. It's more like these are the types of things that can be done, because look at the resources and people have, look at the information people have easily at their fingertips in the right ways. Jake says you'll have to get a chapter on how communism can unleash the potential of nuclear energy for meal. Yeah, that's just for the Dutch edition. We're writing that chapter. It's going to be 1,000 pages. Let's see here. One from Yara again. Donal and Tom, what sources have you found that conceptualize the most efficient determination of price in a post-capitalist society? So for the use values that are still commodities. Right. So we wouldn't call them commodities, but we'd call them a good. I presume that's what you're trying to say, as in, like, ones that aren't free at the point of use.
Maybe what's meant is the apart from labor time accounting, is that what's meant? That because you say that there are still commodities, and what are the most efficient determinations of price? So I would say we're very much focused on the GIC method of labor time accounting. So as far as price determination in a commodity economy, I think capitalism and a commodity economy has its own inherent sort of laws. Oh, sorry, there's a comment. If exchange occurs, then the product or service is a commodity. Right. I think we will have to explain that a bit more. Do you want to?
Yeah. So, like, what do we mean by exchange? You see?
Yeah, that's the question. Yeah.
Right. Like, what is Marx talking about when he's talking about exchange? And, like, exchange is something whereby, exchange is based upon private production, where a good is exchanged, and in that process of exchanging the good, it valorizes capital. So, and in that has got exploitation and everything built into it, as opposed to in a communist society where a producer produces a good and a person has to buy it with a certain amount of labor tokens or whatever that they have earned, right? So that, like, for Marx, that's not an exchange. It's like I think in the Critique of the God program, he calls it a transfer or something like that. That's how we are understanding it. So we would not, I buy in a shoe for 2.5 labor hours. For us is like, we won't be calling that. We're trying to be consistent and not call that an exchange. We might call it like a sale or something, right? Or a transfer, right? We're going to be using, so in that sense, we would not call that exchange, if that makes sense. I
think there's a good comment there that just clarifies it even more. It's a commodity if it's produced for exchange value, not if it's concretely exchanged. It's not if it moves between hands. That's not the. So okay, we're getting into a debate as to what a commodity.
We're getting into a debate here. So Yara says the twofold character commodity, the value aspect is priced, and so the product or service bears a price, even if it's measured as units as social labor time. Well, Marx doesn't call them commodities. He says they're not commodities. There's not commodities are not.
But there's no transfer of ownership. I think that's between the associated producers. So.
let's not. We'll have those debates in the book, and we'll say explicitly what we mean. But we'll go on here all night if we're talking about that. Let's see now. Okay, there's the IDA saying it's on GitHub, and the project is called Arbeitszeit app. So work time app. There's my high school German coming in to help.
Out to the lads, yeah. Great work.
Interesting. Yara says Breyer did practical work in the very early 80s trying to help the British Steel Workers Union fighting closures.
Good guy. Yeah, great.
He was close to militant or Socialist Party Great Britain. Interesting. Did not know. Yeah, I'm trying to get him on the show. Hopefully, I'll get him on. And then, like, I've read the book and I've all, my notes made up. I'm just waiting to try and get in contact with him. So that's how it goes with trying to do these podcasts. Sometimes you read a book to try and do a podcast episode, and then like you find out the person's dead or something. You're like, oh shit, or they just don't get back to you. So you do months of reading, and then you got nothing to show from it. That's just the way of the world now. Anything else then, Donal? We're rocking on here for an hour and 40. Is there anything we have? Like, there's plenty of things probably we haven't discussed that's in there. We're trying to make stylistically, the book is trying to be extremely easy for people to understand. I know everybody says that, but it's kind of written how we're pitching it, like in our heads for people, is that like an interested reader will be able to take the book and start with it and may not know much about capital or value or communism or socialism, and get all the arguments and all the ideas in there and get to the end self-contained and understand them all. That's our approach. The idea is kind of like an interested high school student could read Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time and get their head around like general relativity and quantum physics to a certain extent, right? So, but we're going to be, it's not like we're going to be dumbing down, but we're going to try and make it absolutely clear, crystal clear writing, and very straightforward, and try and not be jargony at all unless it's completely required. That's what we hope to produce. Now, I think we were thinking initially it would be about 500 pages. We've kind of come to the conclusion a lot of the chapters will collapse. Some of them have expanded, right? So it's hard for us to tell exactly now, but I would think it'll come in, including notes, probably, and index and everything, in probably around a 400-page book. I think we're looking at the moment. What do you think, Donal?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's realistic.
Yeah, like we have that's interesting. Breyer uses a counting approach to counter the British Steel Corporation's putative evidence of an individually failing steel plant. That's interesting. Yeah. Emil says Capital was written to be read by a wide working class audience. I don't know how well Marx there, because it's still a pretty tough book, let's be honest.
There's been a few popularizations since then, I think.
Yeah.
Don't know how well they've fared either.
Let's just say, I've done a huge chapter, about a 27,000 word chapter on like basically Marxist theories of like value and society and stuff like that, as a kind of an intro, one of the intro chapters. So like, I think hopefully that it'll be, a lot of work. That was a very difficult chapter to write, a lot of work will come into it. But, the idea is hopefully that, even in the writing of these things, it's amazing. And one thing I would say is that in the writing of these things, we've both come to understand what we have thought we've understood, like a lot more clearly. Like I feel by the time we write this book, I think we'll have both learned a hell of a lot.
There's a comment there, 27k chapter equals 3 chapters. Well, it may be divided into 2 chapters at least, because that's an exceptional
27,000 chapters. Did I say 27 chapters?
Oh, words.
Words. I meant words. Yeah.
Just the title,
yeah.
But like, yeah, that's quite exceptional. Don't think that all the chapters are going to be
no, yeah. That's the exception. Like most of the chapters will be probably like 10,000 words, I would say, something like that. What do you reckon, Donal?
We'd have to go back on and count. I haven't done word counts on them recently, so I'm not exactly sure. But you could take a look at a few sample ones there. And you see, as well, just not, you could do word counts on them, but you'd have to highlight just the exact pieces. There's a lot of notes in underneath all of our chapters as well. So,
yeah. A hell
we'll
of a lot.
We can give an update.
Any final questions then from anybody in the chat before we go? It's been quite enjoyable. It's been a good few watching today. It's been good. So we had like up to 20, I think, at one stage. And a lot of banter in the chat. Maybe I'll go through here and say thanks to everybody in the chat first. And then by the time, if there's any final question, we can do them. Thanks to Jardal, Greta, Alex, Marquez, Emil, Jacobs, Auxiliary Statement Guys podcast. Check out Auxiliary Statement podcast. That's a really good podcast. Met up with the boys down in Canterbury a few weeks ago. We went for a beer. The IDA guys in Germany, Jerker Sangfist, Julian Weishaupt, Pedro Alvarez, of course, Jara Handala. I said Emil, didn't I? Already. Let's see, John Watson as well. And Jake's second name. And who else is there? Let's see. That seems to be it. Yours will be the first English language book length application of the GIC approach. Congrats. Well, that's it. Yeah. Like, when for us, like after perusing the literature for so long, and reading I'm not going to say we read everything, but we read pretty much close to everything. We find it safe to say that there has been no great step forward. I feel like you might say Stafford Beer stuff has been a step forward since the GIC, but I would think like that, I think maybe it's been harsh, but there hasn't been like a major achievement in the stuff going forward. And that's the task we've set ourselves is to kind of do a major achievement to the literature. Now, whether we get there or not, we'll find. We'll probably fall flat in our face, but that's our plan for the book, and hopefully we'll if we do half as good as our big heads think we're going to do, hopefully it'll be a good book.
But, I think that's not to say that other people who are super intelligent haven't written a lot of stuff since. It's just we think they've been going down wrong paths. So even if we're not half as intelligent as they are, and we're going in the right path.
Fundamentally, fundamentally to us, that's 100% true. Like, as in, like, one thing to us is like, I was saying when I was talking to some people at, I think Jack from Auxiliary Statements, when we were at the Historical Materialism Conference, and I was saying to Donal as well plenty of times, we're saying like, God, when you have the lens of the GIC to look at this stuff, right? And also I think the lens of cybernetic lens, that the kind of insights just kind of fall in your lap in some sense, as in like these insights are waiting to be had. And like, sometimes in science you see like all the famous like quantum physicists, they're all around like 1915 or something. It wasn't just like there was loads of like super brainy people all of a sudden. Then it was like kind of breakthroughs were made and that led to a flowering of stuff. And I think, personally, I feel like the GIC, without the GIC, we would never have been able to do any of this stuff. That's just fundamentally the best book ever written on communist economics. And yeah, hopefully, if we're even like a tenth of what the GIC was, we'll be extremely happy. Does that fair, Donal?
Totally,
yeah. Everybody presumes probably their own book's going to be great, and they're all shite, let's be honest. So ours will probably be just pure shite and all. Now, Emil says, do we get another live stream in a month or two? I like doing the live stream, so we could definitely do another one if people are up for it. Sure. Jerker says, Good stuff. Hope this will stay available after stream. It will indeed. I'll put it up on the podcast probably app as well for those that aren't doing it. Okay, so we'll wrap. We'll say thanks to everybody for your support. For those that have contributed to helping us do the book, you know, it really does help. I'm basically not working for the next 9 months trying to finish it off. So I'll be a broke ass fucker by the time this book comes out. So everything helps. It really does. Okay. Thanks very much. We'll go offline.
Thanks, everyone.